Hello everyone, if you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
The day I landed and wanted to flee. Imagine stepping off a plane after 18 hours of flying, your body screaming for sleep, your mind spinning with exhaustion. And suddenly you realize you cannot even ask for directions without feeling like a complete fool. That was me 8 years ago at Los Angeles International Airport. Standing in the middle of Terminal B with a suitcase that weighed more than my courage and a heart that pounded like it wanted to escape my chest. I remember the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the announcements in English I could barely catch, and the overwhelming smell of coffee and jet fuel mixing into something I could never forget. A woman in a blue uniform walked up to me, her face kind, and she asked, "Are you okay? You look lost." And my brain, already overloaded and misfiring, somehow translated her words into, "Are you a criminal?" I froze. My eyes widened. And then, without thinking, I turned around and ran. I actually ran. Straight into a glass door. The sound echoed through the terminal like a gunshot, and I stood there, holding my nose, blood dripping onto my white shirt, while everyone stared at me like I was the lead actress in a comedy show I never auditioned for. That moment, right there, was my first real lesson about life in America. Not everything is what you think it is. And sometimes your own fear is the only enemy you have. But here's the part that shocks most people. I almost got back on a plane that same day. I had $200 in my pocket, a phone with no service, and a name on a piece of paper that I could not even pronounce correctly. I sat in the airport bathroom, crying into paper towels, thinking, what have I done? Why did I leave everything I knew behind? The walls were cold, the lights were harsh, and I felt smaller than I had ever felt in my entire life. And yet, something stopped me. It was not hope, not courage, not some beautiful speech I gave myself in the mirror. It was hunger. I was starving. And that simple, ridiculous need for a sandwich forced me to walk out of that bathroom, find a food court, and try to order something. The cashier asked me what I wanted, and I pointed at a picture of a burger because I could not remember the word burger. She smiled, handed me my food, and said, "Welcome to America, honey." That single moment of warmth, that tiny human connection, pulled me back from the edge. And I realized something powerful. In a place where everything is foreign, a small kindness can feel like home. This is my story, my American story, and it is still being written. But how did I go from a terrified woman bleeding into a napkin at LAX to someone who can now laugh about it? The answer might surprise you, and it has everything to do with how I learned to listen, to speak, and to finally, slowly, understand the world around me. But before we get there, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt so lost that you thought about giving up completely? Because I have, and I am about to tell you exactly what happened next, and why that moment changed everything forever. When every word felt like a brick wall. Let me ask you something that might make you uncomfortable. Have you ever opened your mouth to speak and felt like the words were trapped somewhere between your brain and your tongue? Like they were playing a cruel game of hide and seek that you were destined to lose? Because that was my reality for the first 3 months in America. And I am not exaggerating when I tell you that I once spent 45 minutes in a grocery store trying to ask for cinnamon. only to walk out empty-handed because I could not make my mouth form the sound correctly. I remember standing in the baking aisle, staring at rows of brown jars, my eyes desperately scanning for that familiar spice. And a kind older woman noticed my struggle and asked, "Can I help you find something, dear?" My heart raced. My palms sweated. And what came out of my mouth was not cinnamon, but something that sounded like shinnamin with a heavy accent that made the word completely unrecognizable. She tilted her head, confused, and asked me to repeat it. I tried again, this time saying Kanamon, and she still could not understand me. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to sink into the linoleum floor and never be seen again. That moment of failure followed me home, and I sat on my tiny apartment floor, crying into a bowl of instant noodles, wondering if I would ever be understood. But here is what nobody tells you about learning English in America. The problem is not your vocabulary, it is your fear. A study from the University of Chicago found that when non-native speakers feel anxious, their working memory capacity drops by nearly 50%. Which means you are literally forgetting words you already know because your brain is too busy panicking. I was not stupid, I was terrified. And once I understood that, something shifted inside me. I decided to stop caring about perfection and start embracing the beautiful mess of being a beginner. I started speaking to myself in English every morning while brushing my teeth, practicing simple sentences like, "I am going to buy milk today, and I need to call my friend later." I repeated them until my tongue memorized the rhythm, until the sounds felt less foreign and more familiar. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, I began to hear myself in this new language. But the real breakthrough happened on a rainy Tuesday when I walked into a bookstore and accidentally asked for a book about dying instead of a book about dying because I mixed up the pronunciation, and the bookseller looked at me with such genuine concern that I had to explain, through laughter and tears, that I was not suicidal, I just wanted to learn how to color my hair. We both laughed for 10 minutes straight, and in that laughter, I discovered something magical: mistakes make you human. And being human connects you to others in ways perfection never could. That afternoon, I walked out with a book, a new friend, and a secret that changed everything. The key to learning English is not memorization. It is making people smile. But just when I thought I was finally finding my footing, I walked into a coffee shop and made a mistake so embarrassing, so utterly ridiculous, that it would lead me to the most unexpected love story of my life. What happened next will make you laugh, cry, and question everything you thought you knew about finding your voice in a foreign land. The coffee shop mistake that changed everything. Picture this. You walk into a cozy coffee shop on a gray Tuesday morning, your heart set on a warm cup of comfort. And you confidently say to the handsome barista with the kindest blue eyes you have ever seen, "I want a cup of coffee with scream, please." Not cream. Scream. With an S. I actually said it out loud, in public, to a stranger who looked at me like I had just requested a side of terror with my latte. The moment those words left my mouth, I knew something was wrong because his eyebrows shot up so high they almost disappeared into his hairline. And then he did something that stopped my heart cold. He started laughing. Not a mean laugh, not a mocking laugh, but the kind of genuine belly-deep laughter that makes you want to join in even when you are the one being laughed at. He leaned over the counter, his eyes sparkling, and said, "Scream? Like a horror movie scream? Or are you just really excited about your coffee?" And I stood there, frozen, my face burning so hot I probably looked like a tomato wearing a jacket, and I stammered out something like cream. Cream, I meant cream. But by then it was too late, the damage was done, and a line of customers behind me were also starting to giggle. I wanted to crawl under the nearest table and never come out, but something inside me clicked that day, instead of running away in shame. I laughed too. I laughed so hard my stomach hurt, and I said, "Yes, I want my coffee with a scream today. I am very excited to be alive and caffeinated." And that man, that blue-eyed barista with the killer smile, grabbed a marker and wrote on my cup in big bold letters, "Scream with Joy." He handed it to me and said, "That is the best order I have ever taken. Come back tomorrow and tell me how the screaming was." And I did. I came back the next day, and the day after that, and suddenly I realized something profound. My mistake had become my invitation. It had broken down a wall that I did not even know I had built. All those weeks I spent terrified of sounding stupid, terrified of being judged, and the moment I stopped fighting my accent and started owning it, the entire world opened up. Research from Harvard actually shows that our brains remember embarrassing moments more vividly because they trigger emotional memory. Which means you are scientifically wired to remember the lesson when you screw up in public. So every time I mispronounced a word, every time I confused beach with something far more inappropriate, I was literally training my brain to never forget the correct version. That coffee shop became my classroom, and that barista became my unexpected teacher. We started having small conversations every morning, simple at first, then deeper. And somewhere between the steam of the espresso machine and the warmth of his laughter, I stopped being afraid of English. I started craving it. But what I did not know was that this coffee shop, this silly mistake, and this man with the kind eyes were about to lead me down a path I never saw coming. A path that would test everything I thought I knew about love, language, and starting over in a country that was not mine but was slowly becoming exactly that. A stranger in the laundromat, our first hello. What if I told you that the most romantic moment of my life happened not in Paris, not on a beach at sunset, but in a fluorescent-lit laundromat on a random Saturday night, surrounded by spinning dryers and the faint smell of detergent and someone else's gym socks? Because that is exactly where it happened, and I still cannot believe it myself. I was sitting on one of those hard plastic chairs that make your back ache after 5 minutes, staring blankly at my clothes tumbling in circles, when the door swung open and in walked the blue-eyed barista from the coffee shop, the one who had written "Scream with Joy" on my cup 2 months earlier. He was carrying a massive bag of laundry, looking exhausted and kind of adorable with his messy hair and wrinkled shirt, and when he saw me, his face lit up like he had just found $100 on the street. He walked straight over, sat down next to me without asking, and said, "You again? Still screaming with joy?" And I laughed, genuinely laughed, because somehow this stranger had become the most familiar face in my new world. We talked for hours that night, about our families, our dreams, the ridiculous things we had both said in English that made no sense. He told me he had moved to Los Angeles from a small town in Ohio, and he felt just as lost as I did, even though he spoke the language perfectly. I grew up here, he said, and I still do not understand half of what people are talking about. You are doing great. That moment, sitting there watching our clothes spin together, something shifted inside me. I realized that the language barrier was not just about words, it was about trust. About letting someone see the broken, stumbling version of you and still choosing to stay. A study from the University of Southern California found that non-native speakers often bond more deeply with native speakers who show patience and humor, because those interactions lower anxiety and boost confidence in ways formal classrooms never can. And that is exactly what he gave me: patience, laughter, and a willingness to listen even when my sentences came out backwards. We started meeting at that laundromat every Saturday night, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. We would bring snacks, sit on those uncomfortable chairs, and practice English together, him teaching me phrases like hit the sack and spill the beans, and me teaching him how to say things in my language just to watch him struggle the way I struggled. It was beautiful, messy, and completely unexpected. And somewhere between the spin cycle and the fabric softener, I fell in love. Not the kind of love you see in movies, not dramatic and perfect, but the kind that feels like coming home to a place you have never been before. But here's the part one did not see coming. The next Saturday, he did not show up. I sat there for 3 hours, my laundry long finished, waiting and wondering if I had imagined everything. And just as I was about to leave, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number that made my heart stop completely. What did it say? Let us just say it changed everything, and I am about to tell you exactly why I nearly fell out of my chair right there in that laundromat. Navigating American dating culture, two worlds collide. Imagine you are on your very first date in America, sitting across from a man who looks like he stepped out of a rom-com. And he asks you a simple question: so, what are you looking for? And your brain, still working in translation mode, hears, what are you looking for right now in this exact moment? So you point at the menu and say, I am looking for a burger, please. And he stares at you like you just answered a philosophical question with a fast food order. That happened to me. On our first official date. The barista from the laundromat, his name was Jake, and yes, we finally graduated from coffee shop banter to actual dating. Took me to a beautiful restaurant in downtown Los Angeles. The kind with candles on the tables and waiters who speak in whispers. And when he asked me that question, I completely missed the deeper meaning. In American dating culture, what are you looking for is code for are you ready for commitment, or are we keeping it casual? But I did not know that. I just wanted a burger. He laughed, of course, because he was used to my translation errors by then. But that night I realized that dating in a foreign language is like learning to walk all over again, except this time you are also learning a whole new set of unspoken rules. Americans are surprisingly direct. They say what they mean, mostly, but they also have this layer of casualness that can be confusing. Like when he said let's hang out sometime, I thought he meant next week, but he actually meant tomorrow. Or when he said we should grab a drink, I assumed coffee, but he meant actual alcohol. I learned that the word dating itself is a minefield. Some people use it to mean exclusive relationship and others use it to mean we are casually exploring options. I spent my first 3 months in this relationship constantly overthinking every word, every text, every emoji he sent. Research from Stanford actually shows that cross-cultural couples spend 40% more time negotiating meaning than same-culture couples. Because they have to interpret not just words but also cultural context. And that was us, two people from completely different worlds, trying to build something beautiful with a dictionary and a lot of patience. But here is what surprised me most. The struggle brought us closer. Every misunderstanding became a story. Every awkward moment became a memory. And the more I stumbled, the more he fell for me, not despite my mistakes, but because of them. He told me once, "You make me see the world differently. Everything is fresh with you." And I realized that the language barrier was actually a gift. It forced us to communicate with more care, more humor, and more honesty than most couples ever do. But just when I thought we had figured it all out, his family invited me to Thanksgiving dinner, and I made a cultural mistake so massive, so deeply embarrassing, that I seriously considered faking a sudden illness to escape. What did I do that nearly ended everything before it truly began? Let me tell you, it involves a turkey, a very confused grandmother, and a word I will never mispronounce again. The wedding, two worlds collide. Let me tell you something they do not warn you about when you marry someone from a different culture. Your wedding day is not just a celebration. It is a battlefield of expectations, traditions, and the terrifying moment when your mother-in-law asks you to say something traditional in your native language while everyone stares at you like you are about to perform magic. I stood in that wedding dress, a beautiful white gown I had spent months saving for, looking at the crowd of American faces and my own family who had flown in from halfway across the world, and I thought, what have I signed up for? Because here is the truth, weddings in America are loud, emotional, and surprisingly fast. No one told me that the ceremony itself lasts maybe 20 minutes, and then everyone eats, drinks, and dances like there is no tomorrow. But in my culture, weddings are marathons, 3-day affairs with ritual after ritual. And my mother had secretly packed a bag of traditional decorations without telling me. She pulled them out at the reception, right in front of Jake's very confused grandmother, and started setting up an altar with red fabric and candles. Jake's grandmother, sweet as she was, leaned over and whispered to me, "Is this for a séance, honey?" I nearly choked on my champagne. There I was, caught between two worlds, trying to explain to an 80-year-old woman that no, the red cloth was not for summoning spirits. It was for blessing the marriage, and no, the candles were not for witchcraft, they were for honoring ancestors. The look on her face was priceless, and I have to admit, I almost started laughing hysterically right then and there. But the real disaster came when Jake's father stood up to give a speech. He was a big man with a booming voice, the kind who commands attention without trying, and he said, "Welcome to the family, sweetheart. Now tell us, what is the most American thing you have learned?" And my nervous brain, desperate to impress, translated most American thing into most American food because that made sense to me. So I shouted into the microphone, "Pancakes." I have learned to love pancakes. Everyone roared with laughter, but I did not understand why until Jake leaned over and whispered, he meant culture, babe. Not food. Culture. I wanted to die. I literally wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. But then something incredible happened. Jake's father raised his glass and said, "To pancakes. And to the woman who always keeps us laughing." And the whole room cheered. That moment, surrounded by people who did not share my language or my traditions, I realized that love does not require perfect understanding. It requires the willingness to laugh together when things go wrong. Research from the Gottman Institute actually found that couples who laugh together during stressful moments have a 95% higher chance of staying together long term, because humor is a bonding mechanism that lowers cortisol and builds connection. And that is exactly what we did. We laughed through the cultural chaos, through the mispronunciations, through the altar situation that almost gave his grandmother a heart attack. We survived. But what I did not know was that the real test was just beginning, because 5 months after that wedding, I held a positive pregnancy test in my hands and realized I was about to become a mother in a country where I still sometimes confuse dice and death at the grocery store. First baby, learning to be parents. What happens when you hold a tiny human being in your arms, a human who is half you and half the man you love? And you realize that everything you know about parenting comes from a culture completely different from the one you are raising this baby in? I stared at my newborn daughter, her little fingers wrapped around my thumb, and I felt something I had never felt before, pure, unadulterated terror mixed with the most overwhelming love I could not even put into words, not in English, not in my native language. Not in any language at all. She was born on a sunny Tuesday morning at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, and the moment the nurse placed her on my chest, I started crying so hard that the doctor actually asked if I was in pain. I was not in pain. I was in shock. I had just become a mother in a country where I still sometimes asked for a spoon instead of sponge at the supermarket. And now I was responsible for keeping this fragile little creature alive. The first week was chaos. Jake and I took turns sleeping in 2-hour shifts, both of us stumbling around the apartment like zombies. And I remember one night I was so exhausted that I tried to breastfeed my daughter while holding a banana because I confused the two in my sleep-deprived haze. Jake woke up to find me whispering to a banana, "Eat, baby, eat," and he laughed so hard he nearly dropped the actual baby. But the real culture shock came when we started navigating American parenting advice. Everywhere I turned, someone had an opinion. The pediatrician said one thing, the parenting blog said another. And my mother on the phone was telling me to do something completely different. In my culture, you keep your baby warm, you swaddle them tightly, you feed them on a strict schedule. In America, everything is different. They told me to let her cry it out, to put her on her back, to let her sleep alone in her own room. I was completely lost. A study from Yale University found that first-generation immigrant parents experience 40% more stress than native-born parents because they are balancing two completely different frameworks of child-rearing. And that was exactly me, caught between the grandmother who wanted to wrap the baby in 5 layers of blankets and the American doctor who said 1 layer was too many. But here is the lesson I learned, and it is a big one. You do not have to choose one culture over the other. You get to create your own. Jake and I sat down one night, both of us exhausted and overwhelmed, and we decided to take what worked from both worlds. We swaddled her tightly the way my mother taught me, but we followed American safe sleep guidelines. We sang lullabies in both languages, so she would grow up knowing the sounds of both her heritages. And somewhere in that beautiful, exhausting, impossible first year, I stopped feeling like I was failing and started feeling like I was building something new. My English improved too, because I was reading parenting books every night. Learning words like colic and latching and sleep regression, words I had never needed before but suddenly could not live without. I became a mother, a wife, and a student all at once, and I was finally starting to feel like I belonged. But just when I thought we had found our rhythm, something happened that made me question everything. Our savings ran out, Jake lost his job. And I found myself standing in a grocery store with a calculator, wondering if we could afford both milk and diapers. How did we survive that year without breaking each other? The answer is not what you think. The hard years, when money was tight. Let me paint you a picture that still makes my chest tight when I think about it, standing in a grocery store aisle, holding my 6-month-old daughter in one arm and a calculator in the other, trying to figure out if I could afford both milk and diapers this week, and realizing I could only choose one. That was the reality of our second year of marriage, the year when everything we had built felt like it was crumbling around us. And I learned a new English word that I hated with every fiber of my being: unemployment. Jake lost his job at the coffee shop when the owner sold the business, and suddenly our careful budget, our plans, our dreams of buying a house, all of it evaporated like steam from a hot cup of coffee. I remember the night he came home and told me, his face pale, his hands shaking, and the first thing I said was, "What did you say?" Because I genuinely could not understand his English. The words were too fast, too jumbled, and my brain was too terrified to translate properly. He repeated it slowly. "I lost my job, babe. I am so sorry." And I just stood there, frozen, holding our baby, feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath me. I had never been so scared in my entire life, not even when I first landed at LAX with $200 and a prayer. This was different. This was not just me anymore. This was us, a family, 2 people and a tiny baby who depended on us for everything. The next few months were the hardest of my life. We stopped eating out, stopped buying anything that was not absolutely necessary, and I started applying for every job I could find: cleaning houses, babysitting, working at a fast food restaurant, anything. My English was still not perfect, and I remember one interview where the manager asked, "Tell me about your experience," and I said, "I have a baby. I am experienced in crying and not sleeping," and he laughed but did not hire me. I cried in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I realized that crying would not pay the bills. But here is the thing about hitting rock bottom: you learn a language you never knew existed. I learned the words for budget and cut back and emergency fund. I learned phrases like, we will get through this and this is temporary and I love you even when we have nothing. Research from Princeton University actually shows that financial stress triggers the same neural pathways as physical pain. Which means poverty literally hurts your brain. But it also activates resilience, because humans are wired to survive, and I was determined to survive for my daughter. Jake and I became a team in a way we never had before. We sat at our tiny kitchen table every night, eating rice and beans. Going over our finances with a single lamp because we could not afford the electricity bill. We fought sometimes, ugly fights, the kind where you say things you do not mean and then apologize for hours. But we also laughed, because we had to, because if we did not laugh we would cry forever. And in that darkness, I found something I never expected. My English improved faster than ever because I was fighting for my life, not just learning. I was reading job applications, filling out forms, talking to landlords and bill collectors. And suddenly the words that used to scare me became tools I could use. I went from being afraid of the word interview to acing 3 interviews in 1 week. I got a job at a daycare center, cleaning and caring for children, and it was not glamorous, but it paid the bills. We survived. We made it through. And I learned a truth that changed me forever. Love is not about having everything. It is about having someone who refuses to let you face nothing alone. But just when I thought we had weathered the worst storm, life threw us another curveball that would test everything we had rebuilt together. What happened next would either break us completely or make us stronger than ever. Finding myself in America. What if I told you that the moment I finally felt like I belonged in America was not when I got my first job, not when I bought my first car, not even when I held my daughter for the first time, but on a random Tuesday afternoon when I was standing in my kitchen, making my grandmother's recipe for soup, and I accidentally used the wrong spice because I could not remember the English word for it. And I just laughed instead of crying? That is when I knew I had truly arrived. I was no longer that terrified woman at LAX, no longer the girl who ran into a glass door. No longer the nervous bride who shouted pancakes instead of culture at her own wedding. I was someone new, someone who had been through fire and come out the other side not broken, but reshaped. The hard years had taught me something invaluable. Who I am is not defined by where I come from or where I live now, but by how I choose to show up every single day. I started writing again, something I had not done since I left my home country, because I finally had the words to express what I felt. And here is the beautiful irony, I was writing in English. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but with confidence. I wrote about my journey, about the coffee shop mistakes and the laundromat love story, about the sleepless nights and the empty bank accounts. And I realized that my story was not just mine anymore. It belonged to every person who had ever felt lost in a new place, every woman who had ever doubted herself, every immigrant who had ever wondered if they made the right choice. A study from the University of California, Berkeley, found that storytelling is one of the most powerful tools for integrating into a new culture because it allows you to make sense of your experiences and share them with others, building bridges where walls once stood. And that is exactly what happened to me. I started sharing my stories with friends, with neighbors, with the other moms at my daughter's school. And they did not see me as a foreigner anymore. They saw me as someone who had survived, someone who had something valuable to say. My English had improved to the point where I could make people laugh, move people to tears, and even argue with confidence at school board meetings when they tried to cut the bilingual education program. I went from being a silent observer to an active participant in my own life, and that shift was everything. I also started teaching English to other immigrants, sharing the techniques that had saved me, the mirror practice, the embarrassing mistakes that became memories, the patience to laugh at yourself when you say scream instead of cream. I told them, you are not learning a language. You are learning a new way to be yourself. And I meant it with every fiber of my being. Because America had not changed who I was. It had given me the space to become who I was always meant to be, a woman who could navigate two worlds, who could love deeply, who could fall and get back up again. I am still not perfect, and I never will be. But I finally stopped trying to be. And in that surrender, I found the most important word I had ever learned, enough. I am enough, exactly as I am. But here is the most beautiful part of this journey, my story is not over. It is still being written, every single day, and the next chapter might just be the most surprising one yet. Because while I was busy finding myself, something incredible happened that I never saw coming. Something that made me believe that everything I had been through was leading me exactly where I was supposed to be. Still writing, the story continues. So here I am, sitting in my kitchen on a quiet Sunday morning, watching my daughter color at the table while my son builds a tower of blocks that will inevitably collapse in about 30 seconds. And I realize something that makes my heart swell with a feeling I cannot even name. I am living the life I never knew I wanted. Not the life I planned, not the life I imagined when I stepped off that plane 8 years ago, but something so much better, so much richer. So much more real than any dream I could have conjured. Jake is making pancakes in the corner, the same pancakes that once made me shout the wrong answer at our wedding. And he is singing along to a song on the radio, completely off-key, and the kids are laughing at him, and I am laughing too, and I think, this is it. This is what I crossed an ocean to find. Not a perfect life, not an easy life, but a life that is mine. My English is still not flawless, and I still mispronounce words sometimes, but now when I do, I just correct myself and move on because I have learned something more important than any grammar rule. Communication is not about perfection. It is about connection. My daughter is bilingual, switching between English and my native language without even thinking, and my son is starting to do the same. They are growing up in two worlds, just like I did, but unlike me, they do not have to choose one. They get to have both. And I have finally stopped feeling like I am not enough because of where I came from or how I speak. Jake and I have been through so much together. The excitement of new love, the chaos of new parenthood, the fear of financial collapse, the exhaustion of rebuilding, and somehow, we are still here, still together, still laughing. A study from the University of Pennsylvania found that couples who endure significant shared stress and come out the other side report higher levels of relationship satisfaction than couples who never faced adversity at all. because adversity builds resilience, and resilience builds intimacy. And that is exactly what happened to us. We were forged in fire, and we came out stronger. The other day, I was putting my daughter to bed, and she asked me, "Mommy, were you always this happy?" And I had to pause because the answer was no. I was not always happy. I was not always happy. But I kept going, and I found my happiness because I did not give up. She looked at me with those big eyes, and she said, "That is good, Mommy. I am glad you did not give up." And I hugged her so tight I thought she might burst. That is the message I want to leave you with today. Whoever you are, wherever you are in your journey, your story is not over. It is still being written. Every single day, you are adding new pages, new chapters, new twists and turns that you never expected. You might be struggling with English right now, feeling like you will never understand, never speak, never belong. But I promise you, if you keep showing up, keep making mistakes, keep laughing at yourself, keep trying, one day you will look back and realize that you did not just learn a language. You learned how to become yourself. So what is your American story? Or your British story, your Australian story, your story of starting over in a place that feels foreign? It is still being written, and you are the author. And the best part is, you get to decide how it ends. That is all for today. I will make more similar videos in the future. Please subscribe to watch.